All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive in. Today we're going deep on Vietnam, specifically why it's becoming such a hot spot for sourcing products.
It's definitely a trend we're seeing more and more of.
Yeah. And actually, one of our listeners sent in this article, 7 compelling reasons to source your products from Vietnamese factories.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It is. And in their notes, it seemed like they were particularly interested in, keeping costs down, but obviously not at the expense of ethical production.
Right, finding that balance.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
we'll definitely cover that. But first, let's talk about the cost savings themselves, because the article highlighted Vietnam's competitive edge there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, did you know that on average, manufacturing workers in Vietnam earn about half of what their counterparts in China do?
Wow, half. That's a huge difference.
It is. It's significant.
But okay, let's be real. Like sometimes, cutting costs means cutting corners, right? Does that happen in Vietnam? Does that lower cost mean lower quality?
That's the thing. It really doesn't. Vietnam has been building a really strong reputation for high-quality manufacturing. I think what's impressive is that they have a skilled workforce, they're dedicated, and they are really focused on meeting those international standards.
That's really good to hear. So it sounds like Vietnam really does offer the best of both worlds, affordability and quality.
Yeah, you don't have to compromise.
I like that. And the article even mentioned how their factories, they excel in all sorts of sectors, electronics, textiles, furniture.
It's pretty diverse.
Yeah, they really do seem to have it all.
Yeah, and think about it, like the smartphones we use every day, a lot of them are made in Vietnam. Or, you see these beautifully crafted wooden furniture pieces. A good chance those are from Vietnam too.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So that quality across different industries means you've got options no matter what your business is, what you specialize in.
Yeah, options are key.
Okay, but what about the logistics? Importing from Vietnam. I know a lot of people get really intimidated by that. Like all the trade agreements, it can be a headache.
It can be confusing.
It is. And actually, our listener specifically flagged that as a concern in their notes. But the articles seem pretty optimistic about it. Yeah, well, there's a good reason for that. Vietnam has these trade agreements, like the EVFTA, that's the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement,
All right.
and the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. And those have really simplified importing.
Oh, interesting. So instead of making it harder, these agreements are actually making it easier.
Exactly.
Okay, but what does that mean, practically speaking, for, someone actually importing goods?
So think of it this way. These agreements, they're designed to reduce tariffs and, cut through a lot of that red tape that usually comes with international trade. So
Yeah.
it ends up being a smoother process, it's faster, and ultimately it's more cost effective.
Yeah, that's what we like to hear. Less hassle and lower costs.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's say, we've got cost savings, quality's good, importing's running smoothly. Can Vietnam handle, the variety that a business might need? Like, what if you need a ton of different products or very specific things?
That's where the diversity of Vietnamese manufacturing is a real advantage. They make everything, clothing, footwear, electronics, you name it. They even produce heavy machinery.
Wow.
And that just means, incredible flexibility for businesses.
So whether you're looking for mass production or something more specialized, a smaller order, they can probably handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a one-stop shop for sourcing.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
Okay, but now let's talk about the ethical side of things, because I know this was a big concern for our listener, and it's something we always want to address.
Of course.
So the article touched on Vietnam's commitment to ethical sourcing, but can you expand on that a bit? What exactly are they doing to make sure production is responsible?
Well, a lot of factories are really stepping up and adopting these eco-friendly practices, and they're making sure they're meeting those international labor standards.
Okay, so it's not just talk. They're actually doing it.
Yeah, they're putting in the work to create a more sustainable and ethical manufacturing environment.
That's great to hear. And, it seems like they understand that ethical sourcing isn't just the right thing to do. It's good business.
Oh, absolutely.
Customers are more aware now than ever, and they want to support brands that are doing things the right way.
Yeah, and by embracing those ethical practices, Vietnamese manufacturers are aligning themselves with what consumers want, and that can give businesses that source from them a real advantage.
For sure. So we've got cost effectiveness, high quality, smooth importing, diverse products, ethical sourcing. Anything I'm missing?
Well, there's one more big piece of the puzzle we haven't touched on yet. The role of the Vietnamese government in all of this.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and that's something we'll dive into next time.
Perfect. Sounds good.
So yeah, the Vietnamese government, they're really a key part of this whole sourcing success story.
Okay. How so?
Well, the article talked about how they're like putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to supporting businesses.
Okay.
They're investing a lot in infrastructure. Think like new roads, upgrading ports, making those logistics networks really efficient.
So it sounds like they're not just like saying they want to support businesses. They're actually taking concrete steps to make it easier to operate there.
Exactly.
I like that. But how does that translate to actual benefits for, someone who's sourcing products?
Okay, so think of it from a logistics standpoint.
Right.
Improved infrastructure, that means faster delivery times. You've got a more streamlined supply chain, ultimately, fewer headaches for businesses.
Yeah, that makes sense. Less time, less money, less stress.
Exactly.
Okay, but let's, be realistic for a second. Like in today's world, things change all the time, right?
Yeah.
What if there's some disruption, something unexpected? How does sourcing from Vietnam help with that?
That's a really good question, and it brings up the whole idea of diversification.
Okay.
One of the big advantages of sourcing from Vietnam is that it helps you spread out your risk. It's like they say, don't put all your eggs in one basket,
Right, right.
especially if that basket could be vulnerable to, I don't know, political instability or trade wars, things like that.
So you're saying it's like a backup plan, almost like a safety net in case things go wrong somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Like imagine if you rely too heavily on one place, like China, for example,
Mm.
and something happens there. It could be political, economic, even a natural disaster. That could really mess up your whole supply chain.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So by diversifying, by bringing Vietnam into the mix, you're basically building in that resilience. You're protecting yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of positives,
Mm.
but I'm sure there's some challenges too, right? It can't all be perfect.
Well, yeah, I mean, the article painted a pretty rosy picture. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. There are definitely some things to think about, some potential downsides, and it really depends on, your specific business needs and priorities.
Okay, so let's talk about those. What are some of the things that, businesses should be aware of before they like jump in headfirst into sourcing from Vietnam?
Well, one thing is, even though Vietnam's infrastructure is getting better really quickly, it might not be quite at the same level as, say, China's in certain
Oh,
areas.
okay.
Like if you have really specific, highly specialized needs, you might run into some bottlenecks, or it might be hard to find the exact expertise you're looking for.
So even though the government's making progress, there's still some room for improvement.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the factories themselves? Are there any concerns about like their capacity, how much they can produce compared to other places?
Yeah, that's another thing to keep in mind. A lot of Vietnamese factories, they're still, relatively small to medium size.
good.
So if you need like massive, huge production runs, you might need to work with multiple suppliers or maybe look at other options.
So it's about finding the right fit in terms of like scale and expertise.
Exactly.
Got it. Anything else? Like what about communication? Are there any like cultural differences that might be tricky, working with Vietnamese suppliers?
Oh, for sure. That's something to be mindful of. While English is getting more common in Vietnam, it's not as widespread as in some other places.
Okay.
So it's really important to have a partner who understands both the language and the culture.
Yeah, so they can bridge that gap.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Because those cultural nuances can be really tricky in business.
for sure. Okay, now this is like a bigger picture question. But what about things like, political stability or the economy in Vietnam? Are those things to worry about?
I mean, yeah, it's always good to be aware Vietnam has been pretty stable politically, and their economy has been growing like crazy.
Yeah.
But, things can change. So it's important to stay informed about what's going on, globally. Any trends that could affect your business,
Yeah.
just be proactive.
So even with all the good stuff, you still got to do your homework, stay up to date, and like have a backup plan just in case.
Exactly.
Okay, what about the environmental impact of all this? We talk about sustainability, but are there still concerns about, how manufacturing affects the environment in Vietnam?
That's a good point. Vietnam is making a lot of progress, but some industries still have work to do to be fully sustainable.
Right.
So it really comes down to, doing your research on the suppliers, making sure they match your values, your standards.
So it's about being selective, choosing the partners that are really committed to doing things the right way.
Yep.
Okay, so we've looked at the good, the bad. It seems like Vietnam has a lot to offer, but it's not like a guaranteed slam dunk.
Right.
It sounds like research and planning are really important.
They are, for sure. Sourcing from Vietnam, like any big business decision, you need a strategy. You got to understand the opportunities, the challenges, weigh everything out, and decide, does this fit with my goals, my values?
So how do our listeners know, after all of this, if Vietnam is the right place for them to source from? Like, what are the key questions they should be asking themselves?
That's the big question, and it's something we can dive into next time.
All right, perfect. Sounds
Sure.
good. Okay, so we've explored Vietnam pretty thoroughly, looked at all the angles. Now it's decision time. How do our listeners figure out if Vietnam is the right fit for them? What are the key questions they should be asking?
I think it starts with looking inward,
Mhm.
asking yourself, what are my top priorities when it comes to sourcing?
Right.
Like, is it just about getting the lowest price possible, or are things like high quality, ethical production, are those just as important? Or maybe even more important.
Yeah.
And, what kind of expertise am I looking for in a supplier? How much can they produce? Getting really clear on those non-negotiables, that's crucial.
So figure out your must-haves, your deal breakers, before you even really start looking at Vietnam specifically.
Exactly.
Okay, what's next?
Well, once you've got those priorities straight, then you can get really specific about your product.
Okay.
What exactly are you sourcing? How much do you need? Are there any like special manufacturing techniques involved? Any unique
So it's
materials?
not just can they make stuff, it's can they make my stuff the way I need it?
Yeah, exactly. Because if they can't meet those specific requirements, then it doesn't really matter how great everything else is.
Right, right. What else?
Think about your risk tolerance.
Okay.
How comfortable are you with maybe longer lead times if it means lower costs?
Mm-hmm.
How would your business handle any disruptions in the supply chain? Things happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Honestly, assessing your appetite for risk, that's really key whenever you're exploring new sourcing options.
So it's about weighing those potential benefits against the potential downsides.
Yep.
Okay, we also talked about, potential cultural differences, communication issues. How can listeners figure out if they're ready to deal with that?
Yeah, ask yourself, have I worked with overseas partners before? Especially in Southeast Asia. Am I willing to put in the time and effort to really understand their culture, how they do business? And, am I going to be patient? Am I going to be adaptable as I learn this new landscape?
So it takes more than just like a good business plan. You need the right mindset too.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to wrap this all up, what's like the ultimate question our listeners should be thinking about?
I think it comes down to this. Does sourcing from Vietnam align with your long-term vision for your business?
Okay.
Does it support your goals, your values, your overall strategy? If, after really thinking about all of this, the answer is a resounding yes, then Vietnam might be exactly what you've been looking for.
That's a great way to put it. So to recap, Vietnam seems like it offers a really compelling combination of cost savings, high quality, ethical practices, and government support. But as with any big decision, it's essential to do your research, ask the tough questions, and make sure it truly aligns with your specific needs and your long-term vision. If you're ready to explore this further, we have other episodes about sourcing in Vietnam, and you can find more resources on our website, including a supplier request for information form. You can even book a free consultation to get personalized guidance. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.